Currently, Earth.
It was February 4th in the year 1861 in Montgomery, Alabama, that delegates from South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana convened to establish the Confederate States of America. As early as 1858, the ongoing conflict between North and South over the issue of slavery led Southern leadership to discuss a unified separation from the United States. By 1860, the majority of the slave states were publicly threatening secession if the Republicans, the anti-slavery party, won the presidency. Following Republican Abraham Lincoln's victory over the divided Democratic Party in November 1860, South Carolina immediately initiated secession proceedings. On December 20th, its legislature passed the Ordinance of Secession, which declared that the Union now subsisting between South Carolina and other states under the name of the United States of America is hereby dissolved. After the declaration, South Carolina set about seizing forts, arsenals, and other strategic locations within the state. Within 6 weeks, 5 more southern states had followed South Carolina's lead. In February of 1861, representatives from 6 seceded states met in Montgomery, Alabama to formally establish a unified government, which they named the Confederate States of America. On February 9th, Jefferson Davis of Mississippi was elected the Confederacy's first president. By the time Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated in March of 1861, Texas had joined the Confederacy, and federal troops held only Fort Sumter in South Carolina, Fort Pickens off the Florida coast, and a handful of minor outposts in the South. On April 12th in 1861, the American Civil War began when Confederate shore batteries under General P.G.T. Beauregard opened fire on Fort Sumter in South Carolina's Charleston Harbor. Within 2 months, Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee had all joined the embattled Confederacy. It was February 4th in the year 1945 that President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin meet to discuss the Allied war effort against Germany and Japan and to try and settle some nagging diplomatic issues. While a number of important agreements were reached at the conference, tensions over European issues, particularly the fate of Poland, foreshadowed the crumbling of the Grand Alliance that had developed between the U.S., Great Britain, and the Soviet Union during World War II and hinted at the Cold War to come. Meeting in the city of Yalta in the Russian Crimean from February 4th to 11th, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin each arrived with their own agendas for the conference. For Stalin, post-war economic assistance for Russia and U.S. and British recognition of a Soviet sphere of influence in Eastern Europe were the main objectives. Churchill had the protection of the British Empire foremost in mind, but also wanted to clarify the post-war status of Germany. Roosevelt's goals included consensus on establishment of the United Nations and gaining Soviet agreement to enter the war against Japan once Hitler had been defeated. None of them left Yalta completely satisfied. There was no definite determination of financial aid for Russia. Many issues pertaining to Germany were deferred for further discussion. As for the United Nations, Stalin wanted all 16 Soviet republics represented in the General Assembly, but he settled for 3, which were the Soviet Union as a whole, Belarusia, and the Ukraine. However, the Soviets did agree to join in the war against Japan 90 days after Hitler's Germany was defeated. It was over the issue of the post-war status of Poland, however, that the animosity and mistrust between the U.S. and the Soviet Union that would characterize the Cold War were most readily apparent. Soviet troops were already in control of Poland. A pro-communist provisional government had already been established, and Stalin was adamant that Russia's interest in the nation be recognized. The U.S. and Great Britain believed that the London-based non-communist Polish government in exile was most representative of the Polish people. The final agreement merely declared that a more broadly based government should be established in Poland. Free elections to determine Poland's future were called for some time in the future. Many U.S. officials were disgusted with the agreement, which they believed condemned Poland to a communist future. Roosevelt, however, felt that he could do no more at the moment since the Soviet army was occupying Poland. As the Cold War became a reality in the years that followed the Yalta Conference, many critics of Roosevelt's foreign policy accused him of selling out at the meeting and naively letting Stalin have his way. It seems doubtful, however, that Roosevelt had much choice. He was able to secure Russian participation in the war against Japan. Russia declared war on Japan on August 8th in 1945, just for trivia, established the basic principles of the United Nations, and did as much as possible to settle the Poland issue. With World War II still raging, his primary interest was in maintaining the Grand Alliance. He believed that troublesome political issues could be postponed and solved after the war. Unfortunately, Roosevelt never got that chance. Almost exactly 2 months after the end of the conference, Roosevelt suffered a stroke and continued his eternity. Fourth, in the year 1999, that plainclothes officers of New York's Police Department Street Crime Unit fired 41 shots at unarmed Amadou Diallo, an immigrant from Guinea. Amadou Diallo continued his eternity as a result. This sparked a public outcry and eventually resulted in the shuttering of the SCU, but the 4 officers who shot him were found not guilty. Sean Carroll, Edward McMillan, Kenneth Boss, Richard Murphy were all members of the SCU, a special plainclothes unit of the NYPD that had earned acclaim from others in law enforcement. At the time of the shooting, the SCU was already involved in controversy. In January, 2 SCU officers had fired 8 shots at Russell Old Dirty Bastard Jones of the Wu-Tang Clan, falsely accusing him of having fired at them when it was later revealed that he had been holding a cell phone, not a gun. The Diallo incident was similar. As he stood on the stoop of his building in the Bronx, the 4 officers mistakenly identified Diallo as a suspect. They claimed to have confused him for a serial rapist, but at other times suggested they had identified him as a mugger or a drug dealer. Whatever their reasoning, the officers who were dressed as civilians shouted at Diallo to show his hands. Diallo apparently reached into his pocket instead, pulling out his wallet as he attempted to run for the safety of his building. Carroll shouted to his fellow officers that Diallo had a gun. The officers later stated that they warned Diallo before opening fire on him. However, a witness testified that they did not give warning before firing at him 41 times and that many of the shots were fired after he had already fallen to the ground. 19 shots hit Diallo, who continued his eternity within minutes. The killing incensed much of the public, to the extent that the officer's trial for reckless endangerment and second-degree murder was moved to Albany. On February 25th in 2000, the jury found the 4 officers not guilty of all charges. Diallo's father, Sekou Diallo, called the verdict the second killing of his son, while the former New York City mayor, David Dinkins, warned, quote, "This will send the wrong message to those members of the street crime unit who walk around saying, 'We own the night,'" unquote. The case did lead to an investigation of the SCU and its subsequent disbandment. Diallo's family filed a civil wrongful death suit against the city and eventually received $3 million. Diallo's case has inspired and been referenced in works by a number of musicians and artists, including Public Enemy, Wyclef Jean, Bruce Springsteen, and The Strokes. All 4 officers remain with the NYPD. Kenneth Boss, who had previously shot another black person who also continued their eternity in 1997, was promoted to sergeant in 2015. Not exactly Black American history, however, still relevant. On February 4th in the year 1794, slavery was abolished in all of the French colonies. It was February 4th in the year 1913 that the awesome Rosa Parks was born.
The information documented on this audio file can be verified on history.com.